Oh, it's gonna be hot.
There's an air conditioner.
Oh, there's an AC. No, it's lying to me, bro.
Oh, sorry. Oh, man, it's going to be just excessive. All right, training for sports. Now, the interesting part about this is that the title of this is slightly misleading. Because that would imply that there is a major difference between training for a sport and training for fitness. There is a little bit of difference, but the overall massive changes are not that much in comparison. But we do need to talk about what specific things would you do when you're going for a specific sport. So this would be a varsity athlete. This would be an Olympic athlete. So somebody outside of the I'm just trying to get in shape and feel better kind of athlete. Or that person you're just trying to inspire to actually go to the gym and stay fit. So this is kind of that level above that. So, I mean, we've got, 100 varsity athletes here? This is the stuff that their coach should be paying attention to when they are designing their workouts for their players. So we're going to have all the different parts of this chapter, and this is a fairly short one in comparison. So whenever you start training, there's always going to be different stresses. Now, we usually talk about the negative ones. So, there's going to be psychological stress. There's going to be the stress of trying to make time in your schedule to do it. There's going to be all the major stresses on your body that are happening. Now, the ones on your body are what we're actually trying to go for when we're training for a specific sport. I've done a lot of gymnastics, I've done a lot of basketball, and I've done a lot of golf when it comes to college athletics. So your positive stress are going to be those major adaptations that happen in the first 6 to 10 weeks of training. It's really fun now that we're getting into week 6 of weight training class over here because I'm having students come up to me and tell me how much stronger all of a sudden they're getting. I had a gal today was like, the first week, and this was on the calf race, she's like, the first week I could only do like 4 of these, and you were supposed to do 25 the first week. I put 25 pounds on here, I could only do 4. And I was just dead. My legs, my calves wouldn't do it anymore. She's on week 6 now. She's putting a 45-pound plate on there, and she's doing it 7 times for 3 sets. I'm like, that's really awesome. She's like, it's just amazing how the body can handle the more weight the more you do it. And that's your body adapting to positive stress there. And all this is going to be dependent on the volume, the amount of weight times reps, and how intense you're actually training. Your quantity of training versus quality training could also be a part of that. So the rate of your adaptations is somewhat genetically limited. It could be like how long your arms are. How tall you are is probably the biggest one. If you're trying to do a bench press, you have to go a lot farther when you got long arms. That's one I struggle with. I had people that can lift so much more than me on the gymnastics team in college, and they were short 5'7" guys that were just short, stocky, and they're like, "What? This is nothing." I'm like, "You only have to move it like 18 inches. I got to move it like 2 feet because my arms are so much longer than yours." But also just how your body reacts could depend on your genetics. My darn wife can do it in 3 weeks. She'll have a 6-pack again. It's so annoying. Me, I can work out for 6 months. I will never have a 6-pack that you can see. It's underneath there. It's underneath the rolls. So variation can be too much versus just right. We'll go into that a lot more. Too much training can have a detriment on your performance, and also increase your injury risk. I did gymnastics, which was probably closer to like a cheerleading gymnastics team is what Adventist gymnastics is. And the more you practice, the more risk you have for injury. And we were doing a lot of tossing people up in the air and catching them. The more you toss people, the more chances they have of getting injured. If you're doing like Olympic gymnastics, the more they try a new trick, the more risk for injury. That's one reason it's so amazing what Simone Biles is doing, is she's doing moves that have never been tried because they didn't want to train long enough to do it. And now that she's in her 20s, it used to be that people were retiring from gymnastics before they were 20. Like your Olympic gymnasts were 16 to 20 years old. So her going for her fourth Olympics is like unheard of. So you do need to balance your volume and intensity, and the biggest thing you got to include in there is rest. You can get an athlete. At one point, I do remember talking to Shamar about that. He said he spent too much time in the gym and started hurting. His muscles actually were hurting because he wouldn't let them recover. Because he was just like a gym rat, spent so much time in there. He didn't do alternating days. He would work out 5 days a week doing the exact same thing over and over, and his muscles got sore. So you got to have rest in between. That's why you set up like leg day, arms day, chest day, back day, and you give the other muscle groups, at least majorly speaking, a rest day, rather than doing total body workouts 5 days in a row. So you can have overtraining, and that could cause some performance decreases. And you'll see that in your like endurance athletes. When they train too much, their times go down. In shorter things like basketball players, I've seen players that have overtrained, and they'll get to the point where their body doesn't recover. And so they spend like their whole day walking stiff because they got DOMs. And they're just like, oh, and they come to practice and they can barely move for the first 30 minutes of practice because they got to break up all the lactic acid, or their muscles cramp way faster than they should. That's another way I've seen people overtrain. So generally, there's a model for training. So you're going to have like I don't like undertraining. That's not a good word. That's just what the book has. So that's what you need to know. I usually call that like active rest season. So like right after your championship happens or after your season ends, usually you give them like 5 to 6 weeks off. And you just the only thing you have them come in for is some cardio and some stretching. And you just let them, get caught up on all their schoolwork, give their body a rest. Then you start purposely overloading. So that would be the acute overload stage. So that's where you have a normal training. Then you purposely, they call it overreaching here. So that's a planned one. I got that coming here. And then you could get to the point of overtraining where things go a little wrong. So here's what that looks like in a chart. Undertraining would be the beginning, or would be the off season. The start of your season where you're trying to build muscle, go for hypertrophy, and then purposely doing negatives, doing extra weights is where you'd have your overreaching, but you just have to make sure you keep it in this area so that you don't overtrain or just totally undertrain so that you lose all the adaptations your body's had. So I say a systematic, planned attempt to overstretch the body for a short period is overreaching. So you're allowing the body to adapt to a stronger. This is where I would do negatives. So you purposely do, like if I can do a 150-pound bench press, I would put 180 on there with 3 spotters, and they would lift it off. And I'm like, I'm just going to try to hold it up as long as possible, and it's just going to fall. And your muscle. Oh man, people shake when you're doing negatives, coming down. And then when it's about to hit your chest, the spotters pick it up so they don't injure themselves. Same thing, you can do that for squats. I like doing them, at least in this class. They're actually doing negatives next week on Monday. I'll put them on like the leg kick thing that kicks out, and I'll have their partner help lift it up, and then trying to keep it from going down on purpose, and then watching them walk out of the gym afterwards and they trip because they can't climb up the stairs. Those are pretty funny. That was me. I tripped 3 times walking up 7 steps into the dorm after doing negatives. So you do that all on purpose. You got to be careful not to cross too far into the overtraining. But that would be like doing negatives 4 days in a row, 3 days in a row. That would be going too far. So short performance decrements will happen when you do that, but hopefully it will then improve their performance and functions going further. So excessive training, there's quite a bit here. So you can your volume, intensity, or both can go to the extreme. So either they're spending 3 hours in the gym every day, and they're doing way too much volume. So that would be like you take your weight times your reps to how much volume you're doing. So for a long time, they used to actually, I remember the first weight room in college sports was actually University of Nebraska. They were the first football team to have a strength and conditioning coach. And that would have been probably in the 60s and 70s when Nebraska started being good, which they're terrible right now. But they went on a 50-year streak there from about the 60s to the 2010s where they were in a bowl game every year for 50 years. And it started as the only team that had a strength and conditioning coach. Now, everyone does. So most athletes at that point were undertrained. They either had not enough volume, not enough intensity, but they all thought that, if I exercise too much, I'm not going to be able to play. I remember basketball was a lot of that. Like, if I lift weights, it's going to mess up my jump shot. That's what it used to be. And now you look at LeBron spends way too much time in the gym. And I'm talking like the weights, not the basketball court. And he's playing in year 21 now. Like, if you look at anybody else in year 21, they're averaging like 5 points a game, 10 points a game. They're coming off the bench. They're just trying to hope for another championship. Now, he's starting and still leading his team at year 21. So an example of this would be like a swim team training 3 or 4 hours a day is no better than training for 1 and 1.5 hours a day. In basketball, I know I've had the question with a couple of coaches, is it better to have 2-hour practices or an hour and a half of really intense practice? And one coach that I talked to, he was a fan of the 90-minute practice, and he's like, we are going to have very little breaks. But then another one, like here, they want to have 2-hour practices, and they have a fair amount of breaks up there, at least the practices I've been watching. They don't split them onto 3 different courts and have them all working hard at the same time. There's usually people watching and people playing at the same time. So that's what I mean by keeping the intensity up. So there could be some possible strength and sprint performances by overtraining as well. There was an interesting swim study that had single practices versus multiple sessions. And they were testing like after week 5 to week 20 that they had similar heart rate and blood lactates, and there were no improvements on the 2 times per day groups. So like you can get to the point where you can train too much. I've heard of people doing 3-a-days in football. Probably not going to help them at that point. I remember watching the volleyball DVDs from Nebraska. That's a really good one to watch. But he had no jump practices with his team. So on his second practice of the day, they would do no jumping at all. And I was like, wow, that's different. So they were working on float surge. They were working on passes. They were working on setting. They didn't do any swings. They didn't do any blocks. I'm like, okay, because they didn't want to overtrain or overstress their athletes. So here's some of that study there. So this was their blood lactate concentrations. The first couple of weeks, they split them after 5 weeks, and this was how much it changed there, and this is the area they studied. One group was once a day. The other ones were twice a days. Same concept here, but this would be their heart rates. Let's see, what does it say? Heart rates on a standard 400-meter swim over 25 weeks of training. So from the 5th week, they split them from once per day, and the other group trained twice a day. So interesting that the once-a-days had lower heart rates than the twice-a-days on that sprint test that they were doing. So your volume should be sport-specific. So depending on, like your football players are going to have a more sprinty, powerlifting kind of exercises, whereas your volleyball players, your basketball players are going to be more hypertrophy probably with a plyometric workout. So you're trying to build muscle as quick as you can in the gym when you have the time, but also trying to maintain your quickness. And also depending on your position also might be a bit in there too. A running back's going to have a different workout than a lineman. So in some sports, half the volume is going to maintain benefits and lower the risk. When you're doing gymnastics, having half the volume of training time is going to keep them from getting hurt as often. Same concepts with training time for football. If you're going to have concussions, you're going to have half the time you're going to do tackling, half the time you're not, because you're trying to lower the injury risk. Low intensity, high volume approach is not the way to do for a sprint type athlete. Kind of makes sense there. So the intensity and volume are kind of inversely related. The volume is higher, so if you're doing higher weights, the intensity should be lower. If you have higher intensity, the volume should be lower. So the difference of emphasis is going to depend on what your results you're going for. That's why it's so crazy, that guy that I've emailed with at Point Loma that's trying to power lift and sprint in the same day and set like personal records in both. That's pretty much the opposite of what this is saying. So he's trying to train totally differently than most people do. And the other one, kind of go on here. When you get to this point of excessive training, really check on your athlete's mental health at that point. Because there might be a reason that they're excessively training, because some of them are having some mental health problems, and they're going to be like, the only place I feel I have control is in the weight room. And so they go to the weight room all the time. So just making sure you're checking on that with it, whether you're coaching, training, even in physical therapy, somebody could be overdoing it. So just being real cautious of that as a athlete there. So periodization programs, we could probably have an entire class on periodization if we really wanted. And that's what TNT of weight training next semester. We'll have a couple days on this. So here's kind of an overview. So training periodization programs are divided into cycles. So ranging from a multi-year to a microcycle, like a couple of days. So a cycle could be like, arms day, legs day, chest day. That could be a cycle. But generally, it's done more like large things. So it's best for athletes to focus on one thing like a competition. So I do a lot of gymnastics. So you don't want them to be training a ton in the weight room when it's competition season. When it's volleyball season, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time in the weight room when you're in season. So it's not optimal for sports or training to require, for sports that are requiring any kind of skill development there. Blocking your periodization is also kind of a new thing recently, allowing you to work on a few skills or attributes and then using 3 or 4 days to block that practice in there. And this could be done for what kind of weights you're lifting. This could also be what kind of things you're doing in practice with them. Are you doing it blocked as in the same thing over and over? Are you doing a varied practice? So in general, exercises and specific exercises are used to stimulate those motor skills that you're using to do said actions. So there is overtraining is, they kind of call it an unexplained drop in performance. So if you're all of a sudden, let's say Pablo is training for his next big meet. Did you guys have any more meets left, or are you done? It's done? So let's say this last one that you just did, you for some reason had a way worse run than you did the time before. And you'd be like, what? I've been training this many times a week. I've been doing this. What's going on? That could be a symptom of overtraining. He's been training so much that he overdid it, and then when he gets to his final thing there, in that last meet, and his performance is less than it should have been, that would be a symptom. That's an unexplained drop in performance there. And not all fatigues are products of overtraining. It's kind of one of those there. Can't be remedied. It could be a psychological thing, and also in there as well. Could be in all kinds of training. Resistance trainings, aerobic, anaerobics, can happen in all of them there. And overtraining is very subjective and very individualized. But the easiest way to figure it out is an unexplained, why is this person who used to shoot 90% from the free throw line shooting 50%? That's an extreme case there. But, if somebody goes from Stephen Curry free throw numbers to Shaq, you'd be like, what? What's going on? And so that's what it could be, a mental thing, could be a physical thing, or in the weight room, my personal record's this, but I can't get anywhere close to it. So those are the things. There's some of the symptoms that could have there. Could be drop in strength, coordination. Oh, the guy who couldn't shoot a free throw for the Sixers, Markelle Fultz. It ended up being a neurological problem, so it was like more than psychological, and he definitely had some psych problems there in there as well. But I mean, the guy just totally forgot how to shoot a free throw, like airballing it would freeze halfway through a shot. You could have some sleep problems. Oh, forgot what the big guy was that used to go against LeBron. He was a Indiana Pacers back when he was probably like 7'3", 7'4". They figured out the reason he was doing so poorly in the NBA is his sleep was horrible on the road. So he started bringing an air mattress. So he had the same, and he's also like 7'4", so it was a super long, super big air mattress that was like yay high off the ground so that he could have the same sleep environment, and his performance on the court improved just by improving his sleep. So there could be possibly related to intensity or volume or errors in training, maybe poor technique. Should be psychological factors, and the physiological factors should be immune systems. There's really no clear cause or effect for any of these when it comes to overtraining. It's so specialized, but you just as the professional needs to know what's going on there. Take a standing break. I don't know why I don't have one in here, but we've been going for 20 minutes. Does anybody need your things off of the iPad? Like, did everybody get that turned in? Like, before I delete it, I want to make sure that you got it turned in. Oh, you just had to bring it to me. You could have carried it out to me and said, turn it on. And I'd have done it. You can do it after class today if you got time. I have nothing after. Oh no, we'll have to do it quickly after class. Because I have a meeting with Miss Amy at noon in the caf. All right, so here's what a general training should look like so you start here, you exercise, you lift weights, and you're going to have a decrement to how much you can lift. But you hope that your body's going to improve just a little bit. You train again, and it goes down, and it goes up. And so you're hoping that it'll just kind of have a general upward train. Here's what it would be if you're overtraining, and every time you exercise, you don't recover enough. And that could be because you don't have enough rest days in between. So some other overtraining things that could happen to your nervous system. You could have an increase in blood pressure, loss of appetite, weight loss, sleep and emotional disturbances, and then like their BMR totally changes, so they start like losing weight unexpectedly. And this is where I would say checking in with your athletes is really important. Because if their sympathetic nervous system's going on, these are also all traits of anxiety. Or some other psychological problems there. So making sure you have that conversation with your clients or athletes if these are the things that are going on while they're training. And I'm saying this more from a coach's point of view because that's probably where when you're training for specific sports, you're either going to be the strength and conditioning coach or the head coach or an assistant coach, and you see some of these things happening in your athletes. I always worried as a gymnastics coach about people having eating disorders of some sort. Because I always found out later, like after they graduated, they would come back and tell me I had an eating disorder when I was on your gymnastics team. I'm like, why did you not talk to me about this? There were even I kind of was bothered by it, but gym masters at Southern, when we'd go to Acrofest, all the guys would line up and let all the girls eat first. And I thought it was a gentlemanly thing to do. And I asked one of them, why are you doing that? And they're like, honestly, we're doing it to make sure the girls are eating. And I was like, oh, dang. That's probably not the best reason to be doing that. And this was one of their captains. So like, I don't think they told everybody that out loud. But I was like, okay. I wouldn't actually talk to their coach about it. And he's like, yeah, we're putting an end to that after this year. When these captains are gone, they're not doing that. And when I went on tour with them a few years later, they were not doing that, thank goodness. But yeah, so those are always those things. You're just watching your athletes really closely because you just never know, is it overtraining or is it something else? So your parasympathetic nervous system, this is when somebody gets fatigued really easily. That's what I was saying, like they're getting leg cramps when they shouldn't. Like they just start practice and their legs cramping. What? I'd usually ask them, when did you work out last? And they'd be like, oh, I did a workout right before practice. I'm like, that was not your brightest decision. So their resting heart rate could go way down. Their resting blood pressure could go way down. Their heart rate would recover faster than it should. So most of these are going to be like endurance athletes is where you'll notice this, not so much in like a basketball or a gymnastic kind of thing where I've spent most of my time, but like a cross country or track athlete or marathon runners. So some other responses that could happen is the testosterone levels could go down, and then their cortisol goes up, so those are kind of inversely related there. So you can actually get a blood test of testosterone to cortisone ratio. I haven't seen it done too often, but I know it's been studied. They're not sure if it's what causes that overtraining syndrome or not, but it is an indicator of how the body is recovering. And it's also indicative how fast you're catabolizing your proteins there. So volume-related overtraining apparently is likely to affect the hormones in the body. So that would be more your weightlifting kind of things there. So here's what they were saying about as the testosterone goes down, the cortisol goes up. And as training goes along here in however many days, those are going to continue to change there. Another one is there could be blood in the urine. So yeah, that's one of those things I tell my players is if that's happening, I need to know immediately because that's a pretty high knowledge there if something's wrong. Some of the catalysms can go up there. Some outside things as they could be overreaching too early in their training cycles. The time between the last training and the last blood sample is another thing you got to pay attention to. And then blood markers are helpful, but not a definitive tool. So like if you're taking, you really have to, if you're going to do blood markers on your athletes, you probably should have a baseline at the beginning of the year. And then but you just have to be consistent with, you trained 24 hours ago, let's take a blood samples again and compare it to the thing at the beginning of the year. Now, you're probably not doing that in little high school teams, but like your big football programs, if you're the strength and conditioning coach, if you're the athletic trainer, those are things you would want to have on hand. Some of your neural things, so overstressors can act on some of those hypothalamic signals, can lead to those sympathetic neural activations, so all the things we talked about back here. So your sympathetic things, those could all be a part of that. And then leading to some other pituitary endocrine cascades, so your hormones are going to go all out of whack, is what that's saying. So the hormones acts are involved, so you could have sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, and these are all things you would get from a blood sample. There are also some circulating things in your blood there, so it's going to have an increased response to your bone, muscle, and joint traumas. So you're supposed to do that when you roll your ankle, is you're going to have some extra cytokines there trying to replace and repair everything. But it also is going to happen when you work out and you have muscle strains. So more stress, and you're going to start having more inflammations. My stupid knee right now, I went for a hike with my son on my back. It's the only way he goes down for a nap right now. And I took a back way down the back 40 there, and it was pretty steep. And I took these little tiny steps, and when you got extra 30 pounds on your back, and I got home and I sat down, I'm like, my knee feels like it's got more fluid in it. It just feels full, and my range of motion was to here, and I'm like, wait, that's not good. Put ice on it. So sometimes there's just more inflammation from just using it, but when it gets further than that, so your brain actually might start telling your body to overkeep things. So somebody's going to have a whole bunch of fluid weight in their joints and stuff. That would be really weird. So here's what that could kind of look like as a whole. So when you have your stress, this is that SAM axis, would have these nerves in the spine are going to tell the target organs, going to increase arousal. That's going to stimulate energy, and so there's a whole thing there. I don't think you need to know a ton of this, just know that they exist. I don't think there's any quiz questions on that. So there are a couple other immune factors. So when you combine your compromised immune functions could be a factor, and you'll notice that one pretty easy. Somebody who is exercising a lot, all of a sudden is getting sick a lot. That could be an effect of your body overdoing it there. So the immune function goes up as their disease susceptibility goes down. So as they start exercising, generally the immune response is going to go up. But you can get to the point where it actually crisscrosses when they go overexhausted, overtraining, and now they're getting sick more often than they should. So how to predict that? 5 minutes. So the case, it's really unknown. It's really hard to diagnose overtraining. You just got to have to be knowing what to watch for as the professional. So that threshold is different for each athlete. It could be your intuition sometimes can be unreliable, but I would probably trust your gut as the coach. Like, you can usually see when a player's overdoing it. And there's no really preliminary warning, so sometimes coaches don't realize it until it's too late. So you just got to trust your gut, but be really intuitive of watching your athletes there. So mile run heartbeats here, so training, overtrained, undertrained, and there's kind of a circular motion that would happen there. So ways to treat, biggest one would be reduce the intensity, give them rest. So weeks, months, maybe even. So, and then counseling probably to deal with the stress that's probably going on. So usually overtraining is going to be more than just give them rest. There's probably some psychological things going on there. Prevention, periodization training, building them up, letting them rest, building them up, letting them rest. Those kind of things there. Making sure they're eating enough. If your body can't recover because you're not eating, not going to help there. Once in a while, you will get somebody that's going to have an exercise addiction. Doesn't happen often. Just know that it does exist. So this would be somebody that can't not work out. So they're in the gym 7 days a week, and they get really irritated if they can't work out. And I mean, we're talking like to the point of like screaming, anger, that kind of irritability. It's usually distinguished by continuing to exercise even though their injury, inconveniences to them, disruptions to their family. So this would be like basically somebody exercising instead of like using drugs. It doesn't happen often, but it is possible.
Would that be like inhibitions like the endorphins?
It can be, yes. It's like not always, but that is a possible symptom. It's like if you see someone that's like skipping out on their classes to go work out, it's probably what it would look like for you guys. Somebody that can't, they exercise before, then they have practice afterwards, then they go back to the weight room again. Their grades start slipping. For an adult, they'd be like forgetting their family responsibilities to go work out. I mean, those are exercise addiction. It doesn't happen a lot, but just be aware that it can. Tampering involves reducing the training volume or intensity. So like before a major competition, you would purposely back off on your training so that you can be 100%, your body can be 100% before that last one. Could be 4 to 28 days, depending on what kind of competition you're doing. Probably most appropriate for like infrequent competitions. And you pretty much would make your entire training around, I have a first game is here, or my first meet is here. And you would train around that. So results are going to hopefully be increased strengths and everything's 100%, everything's replenished before their competition of whatever they're doing. Usually it's not going to have, when you taper it off, you're not going to have any deconditioning because it's not going to be long enough. I mean, yes, you could in 28 days have that if you're going a really long time for something. But make sure you're still training a little bit, just not the sport-specific training. So stretching, cardio if you're doing like soccer or something. I'm just an example. You know, when the soccer season ends, don't just totally stop because you could lose your VO2 if you don't exercise. You could, what they hope is that you can have improved performance. So like 3% is what's been studied on a race time, 18 to 25% stronger arm power. So those would be like a power lifter, Olympic lifters. We got time there. Let's see if there's any other ones here. So detraining happens when you forget to use it, which we've kind of already talked about. You could have, when you have a broken limb, totally saw that in my legs when I had a cast over my up to my calf, and I had to stay off of it for, ended up being 6 weeks. If you just stop training, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it for whatever reason. Muscle endurance goes down pretty quick after 2 weeks of not doing stuff. Some of the oxidative things there. So this would be like the VO2 max, how much it drops after 6 weeks. And some other chemicals there. What else do we got? Glycogen stores go down. Yeah, these are all the things that go away. So untrained versus swimmers, their glycogen after not training. So it takes only 4 weeks to get back to an untrained person. That's pretty quick. And some more numbers there. What am I doing on time? 2 minutes. Make sure there's nothing else here that I need to hit on. Bed rest studies. Those are actually really fascinating ones if you want a really fascinating topic. Detraining and bed rest. Fascinating. They do say here 70% VO2 max training is sufficient to maintain your aerobic activity or your aerobic capacity. So after your soccer season is done, training at 70% is probably enough to do it every once in a while. Losses occur when frequency and durations decrease by 2/3 of their training load. So if you're taking those rest weeks for 6 weeks, still letting them lift at 2/3 their weight is probably the best way to do that. Space. Those are so fascinating. When you have nothing, how much your muscles go down with no gravity. We just don't have time to talk about it. Your heart will change a little bit when you're in space. And there's a picture here. Nope. So like when you get to space, the first thing that happens is your legs are used to gravity. And so it'll push all the blood up to your head when you get into space and there's no gravity. And eventually your body will adjust to putting that back. And then when you get back to gravity again, all of a sudden all the blood's going to rush to your legs and their legs will get all swollen because they're not used to it. And their blood muscles and everything are not used to pumping the blood back up. So like your stroke volume is going to change, your blood volume changes, depending on if you're in micro or in no gravity or not. So I think you only have one question on the space stuff there, if I remember right. So in-flight exercise is essential to preserve astronauts' long-term health. That's pretty much what you need to know there. That's all we got. Woohoo! 38 minutes.